So a few opening words from me as the workstream lead for flexibility for open networks. Open networks is one of the key initiatives that bringing together all the network companies across transmission distribution, including the system operator and Northern Ireland Electricity and ESB, to really look at some of the key issues on the optimum-based smart systems and flexibility plan and all the other work around government and regulatory policy, and get a common and standard way of delivering improvements in the short term, but also looking at some of the longer term issues. So in flexibility, we're very much focused in how we can deliver liquid flexibility markets and standardize and common processes across the transmission distribution within the next 1 or 2 years, and immediate, if you like, improvements whilst we are building, if you like, the future from 2023 onwards. We have a steering group where Optimum Base sits and supports the steering of the project, and we also have an advisory group which has a quite wide range of stakeholders and provides input to the project in regular intervals, and criticize some of our comments on proposals and offers. If you like, additional ideas. A lot of the work that we are doing is stakeholder-led, in the sense that our project initiation document, which is the annual, our annual plan of work, if you like, has been consulted. We have the advisory group, and all the key parts of work are publicly consulted, and this is really part of this process, where we want to ensure that the proposals that we put together work for all the market participants and all the affected parties, but also to recognize that we don't have all the answers, and we don't always fully, whilst we're focused on networks, we might not always fully get some of the priorities that other parts of the energy system have. So this is really your opportunity to input. We do take into account all the inputs that we get, and we are building into our program wherever we can. And if we can't, we say why we can't, or have a dialogue. So I think for me, the key thing for today is to encourage feedback and encourage really response to this consultation. It's really at a pivotal point in terms of our work. So Dan, if you could move on to the next slide. Yeah, so the flexibility work stream has been running now since essentially last year, so about 12 to 18 months now, and we have dedicated, so we've developed a dedicated body of work that looks at transparency and standardized approaches across distribution network operators. It increasingly now looks at DSO-ESO coordination and stacking of services, but we also have a product that is looking of how networks can facilitate markets and platforms that might need network data to trade, but the DSO is not necessarily the buyer or the procurer of the products that are traded on those markets. So Dan, if we go to the next slide. So the 2020 work, really, which is the main thing we're here to talk about, has 7 main products of work, and we are going to cover most of them today. The work around the common evaluation methodology for flexibility that Wendy is going to cover, procurement processes that I'm going to cover. Lois will do the active power services. The commercial arrangement is not something that we are going to talk about today, but this is the getting a common contract for flexibility services between the DNOs and flexibility providers. So we now have a common contract. The common contract was published earlier this year. We've received the first set of comments because it's already being implemented, and essentially by November it will be implemented by all DNOs. So we're taking that feedback. We're gonna publish a 1.1 version within the next probably 4 to 6 weeks. And then we're going to publish a version 2 in Q1 at the end of Q1 next year, which we are aiming to be a common DNO, but also ESO for at least for certain ESO products contract that flexibility providers will see and we can use across the UK. So significant milestone of getting that over the line and actually getting it now in production and used by DNOs. Product 5 is new DSO services. So this is about, it's a placeholder for us to make sure that we apply the same rigor in standardizing where we have new products. And product 7 is Helen is going to cover, which is about baselining. There is a piece of work that we've carried from, it's actually a very important piece of work we've carried from 2019, and we've reworked to incorporate the latest developments, and Ben is going to talk about interactions between flexible connections and flexibility services and the revenue stacking work. So we're now going to go into the presentations, and then we're going to allow some time for Q&A, and of course if there are further questions we can pick them up after the webinar. So let's go on, Wendy, on the first presentation.
Good afternoon. My name is Wendy Mantle. I'm from SP Energy Networks, and I'm a member of the product group looking to develop and implement a common evaluation methodology for DNOs to use when assessing flexible v non-flexible options to meet network needs. Next slide, please, Dan. The drivers for this product are to address a key action outlined in the July 2019 Ofgem and BEIS open letter to the ENA, provide transparency on how pre-procurement decisions are made when DNOs assess network solutions such as flexibility services, network reinforcement, and A&M, etc., and to provide consistency to align how the DNOs make these decisions. The scope of the work, which began at the beginning of this year, was to analyse existing approaches to decision-making adopted by DNOs and to understand the pros and cons in the areas of current practice, to develop a common decision-making criteria and methodology for DNOs when choosing between options, reviewing and reflecting input from stakeholders, and to develop a common flexibility valuation methodology as part of this, to include gathering and assessing current practice within the UK and internationally for valuing flexibility, consider and propose common valuation criteria, and to develop the methodology, including the tool and a user manual. Also, we would agree future governance for this methodology. The product group have been working with Beringa, who were commissioned to develop the methodology and the tool. Slide 2, please. Thank you. The Common Evaluation Methodology tool is built to support investment decisions when comparing flexibility products to traditional network interventions. The methodology and tool can be used to evaluate the defined flexibility products, namely the sustain, secure, dynamic and restore, as well as options for alleviating export constraints where curtailment of renewables is occurring. This methodology is the initial baseline, and I'll just give a brief overview to some of the key areas that it includes. First one is the options to be considered. Here we would identify the range of options that were considered to meet the specific network need. The baseline scenario is largely considered to be one that involves the minimum level of intervention required for us to remain compliant with all relevant security standards. For each investment decision, explanations and supporting commentary relating to what assumptions have been used and which regulations the minimum level of intervention relates to, as well as any calculations that we have done external to the tool, are to be included. Next is for us to define the service requirements, and for this, load growth details to assess network needs are required. A scenario or a set of scenarios will be put into the model. It is anticipated that a best view and or the deferred scenarios that have been developed by the DNOs will be used, and such scenarios will provide a view of what the annual exceedance of that particular asset across a range of potential outcomes by comparing the peak load to the current asset capacity. If the use case does not include reinforcement deferral, for example, the use of flexibility to reduce customer interruptions or customer minutes loss risk, the network exceedance elements can be disabled with requirements of social impact manually. For flexibility requirements, specific functionality of the model allows us DNOs to input their flexibility requirements. These can either be tied to the load growth scenarios or input manually. Any over-procurement will also be captured here. Service windows together with a view on the level of utilisation expected will be included. And there's space for commentary in order to aid transparency. For the point of view of economic assessment, the methodology is based on the Ofgem CBA tool currently used for network investment decisions, thereby providing consistency as a number of inputs and values remain consistent. For example, customer interruptions, customer minutes lost, and the weighted average cost of capital. For the time horizon, the methodology analyses the discounted cash flow for each solution over the lifetime of the asset for 45 years. This starts at the beginning of the deferral period and extends for 45 years from the end of the deferral period. Within the Ofgem CBA, the sharing factor from the TROTEX incentive mechanism is applied to all costs. This tool follows the CBA template and does not explicitly include the impact of the sharing factor in cash flows, as it applies equally to the different solution options. To allow the options to be assessed, the appropriate costs across the baseline scenario and all network intervention scenarios are used. Baseline will usually involve asset reinforcement, but other costs can be specified, for example, losses, provided they can be deferred or avoided through the use of flexibility. The tool also allows alternative intervention costs, reflecting the cost to the DNO of the alternative solution to be modeled. One of the key elements is the value of deferring network reinforcement. When comparing a baseline with another solution, in many cases, the other solution involves the option to defer the decision to reinforce the network to some point in the future and use flexibility in the meantime. The tool compares the net present value of discounted cash flows of the baseline, the reinforcement scenario, with the alternative flexibility solution, and provides a view of potential outcomes in terms of net present value for each set of forward-looking load growth scenarios. For demonstrating the potential future value across a range of scenarios, this methodology allows us to explore the potential option value that is created in the future by the decisions that we're making now. There is a facility within the model to explore this option further where probabilities can be applied. Finally, the methodology considers some of the wider network and societal impacts of the different network interventions, including the impact of network losses, emissions, and potential asset condition-driven changes, for example. Some of these inputs are considered core functionality and expected to be used each time this model is used. But in addition, and to add some future proofing, there is additional functionality that is optional at this stage and which we're referring to as sandbox functionality. It is expected that the degree of commonality will increase over time, and this will be discussed through the ongoing governance arrangements, and some of the sandbox functionality may become core, and likewise it may be possible to include greater standardisation of input assumptions across DNOs in the future. We go to slide 3, please. The tool displays the results for us in 3 ways. It provides the ceiling price for the flexibility. This is for a given set of baseline costs, and the model shows the maximum cost of the flexibility solution before it becomes less economic than the traditional asset solution. The net benefit of the specified flexibility price. This is where from provided baseline costs of the counterfactual solution and from specified utilisation and availability rates, the model shows the net benefit of the flexibility solution over the baseline. There is also a summary cost-benefit analysis, providing the costs and benefits for the particular scenario over a specified deferral period, showing the relative impact on reinforcement costs, flexibility losses, and emissions. The tool has also been developed to provide some reporting functionality. Within this is included a summary of statistics where we would show, for example, the level of open procurement that has been included in the assessments. A benefit summary showing the maximum potential benefit from a comparison, or maybe the optimal number of years as appropriate, and plus insights into the use of flex. This can be used for particular strategies whereby probabilities may be assigned to different scenarios. All of this information will feed into and support the DNO's pre-procurement decision-making process. Next slide please, Dan. As mentioned, this methodology is the initial baseline, and we would welcome your comments on the proposed methodology, and we're encouraging feedback on a general approach and also any of the specifics included. And as a final, to conclude, the next steps for this product are for the product group to obviously review and consider the feedback we receive from this consultation and then confirm a final methodology. With regards to future governance, and in order to ensure the methodology evolves, arrangements will need to be confirmed. From early discussions, the product group are proposing to publish the common methodology and the tool and the user guide on the ENA website and also on our individual DNO websites. Use the ENA's administration capability for the open governance of this methodology, and also to form a users group under the ENA for the ongoing development of the methodology and the tool. And in relation to implementation, it is planned that DNOs will start to use the common evaluation methodology from at the latest the 1st of April 2021, and an implementation plan will be published by 31st of December 2020. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. We'll now pass over back to Satiris, who's going to be covering Andrew McKenna for product 2 procurement processes.
Yeah. So yeah, Andrew has led this work, but he's on holiday, so I'll cover for him and for the group. And the focus really of this work has been around further aligning and standardizing. First of all, the procurement timeline, which is the way and the timelines that DNOs use to go from signposting network information through to the flexibility, the actual tender, to publication of the results, and then onto testing of the assets and delivering. So, getting that as a set of agreed timelines with key milestones that all DNOs consistently use. And the other area that we've done work, and we're inviting views and comments and feedback, is around the kind of the procurement weightings and the procurement process. We've identified 4 stages, and one of the key questions is, when exactly do we undertake each of these tests? It's important to say that at the beginning of the year, we did the work where we analyzed what each of the DNOs is doing, and we used that as a basis to essentially do this further work around standardization. If we move to the next slide, please, Dan. Okay, so in terms of the stages, I mentioned the 4 stages of the assessment of the flexibility assets and the flexibility tenders. So the first one is what is called stage 1, which is commercial assessment, and this is all the legal stuff up front, and things like credit scoring and whether the company has a sound financial position. So it's all the pretty standard stuff that the due diligence you carry out to the organization that you were to engage in a commercial way. and that's the scoring criteria for this is pass or fail. Then we have the pre-qualification technical assessment, where we are basically saying, does the specific asset or specific provider meet the criteria of the product parameters as set out as the standard parameters. So these things are around minimum capacity, location, are they in the right location, the right voltage? Do they meet the requirements around, run times, metering, etc.? So again, that's a pass or fail assessment. We then look at the procurement commercial score, which is the assessment of the bid against, against the budget, basically, and that's 70% of the overall, if you like, score. And then we are looking at other aspects. We propose to look at the other aspects more so like a scorecard type approach, where it's around some of the technical characteristics, such as the effectiveness in alleviating the constraint or conflicts, or the type of connection. And that has been a point of discussion really in the group. So that would be an area that would be very interested to hear feedback in terms of the commercial score versus the technical score, and how's that best structured. Can we go to the next one, please, Dan? So these are the assessment criteria. In terms of the proposed timelines, we've first of all, we said that the assessment stages are carried out consistently across the network operators. In terms of the procurement cycles, we propose maximum of 2 structured cycles per year, and I'm going to run through how these are structured. And the idea behind this is that there's a steady stream of prompt communication of the network flexibility needs and the system needs, without necessarily having excessive procurement rounds. The 7 stages we've identified is, the first one is signposting of requirements. So this is about providing ahead. So it's 9 months ahead, but it could be longer, given that some of that information we include in publications such as the long-term development statement. But it's a signposting of requirements, which is essentially as far in advance as possible visibility of where the system need is. Then we have publication of firm requirements, which is the full requirement, the type of product and the characteristics, expected delivery windows, etc. The third stage is the opening of the procurement window, which is invitation for flex providers to formally bid in. Then is the close of the procurement window, which is a close to bid in particular, take part. And after that, of course, you have the results, and you have contract execution, which is the agreement of terms. You have asset testing, and then finally delivery windows. So these are the seven key milestones we've identified. Let's go to the next, Dan. And in terms of the 4 assessment criteria that I identified, we've in the paper, we have looked at 2 options in terms of where the assessment takes place with regards to the stages of the tender. So stage 1 is the commercial pre-qualification, and stage 2 is the technical pre-qualification. So on the first option, commercial pre-qualification happens before technical pre-qualification, and technical pre-qualification happens before the start of the publication of the tender. So that's option 1. On option 2, commercial pre-qualification happens as first thing, as an option 1, but technical pre-qualification happens after the close of the tender. So the kind of the upfront assessment of whether parties are on the right location, voltage, etc., only happens at the end. So this is, and there's a specific question where we're inviting feedback on these 2 different approaches. These are the 2 different approaches that we identified when we looked how DNOs are doing things currently, and they have pros and cons in terms of how much of the work is done up front, but then perhaps how much of the opportunity is then carried out to the to the final evaluation. So if we go to the next slide. So these are the 2. So these are the 2 tender rounds that we are proposing. So we call them the autumn tender and the spring tender. And essentially, you are always signposting the requirement as a minimum of 5 months ahead of publishing the requirement and a minimum of 7 months ahead of publishing the tender. As you can see, having signposted and having given 5 months of publishing the requirement and 7 months of publishing the tender, then it's quite a quick, I guess, turnaround of publishing the tender, closing the tender, and then you have contract execution, the delivery window. And we propose to do one of those at the beginning of the year and one of those essentially later. So kind of Q1 and Q3 thereabouts. Obviously need to look at this in a bit more detail, but that's essentially what we are looking to standardize to. So that's it from product 2. As I said, there are options in terms of when we're doing technical and commercial pre-qualification that we are inviting comments. We're inviting comments on the timeline, and we're also inviting comments on the criteria and the weighting around the criteria in terms of the commercial and technical evaluation of the actual bids. Okay, so I think over to Ben now.
Excellent, thanks, Tiris. So I'm Ben Godfrey. I'm going to go through some of the outputs of their interactions between flexible connections and flexibility services from that paper, and also the revenue stacking paper as well. You can flip to the next slide. So what we're aiming to do under this consultation is to seek some feedback out of some of the results and conclusions from this Flex Connections Flexibility Services interactions paper. So there was a significant number of actions that we're undertaking to clarify and provide more detail on some of the issues raised, and also some continuing work and suggested work for the future to help improve the situation around flexible connections and flexibility services. So essentially what the paper did was set out the historical context, the systems involved, and what their current level of interaction, and then it also looks at what the future levels of interaction may mean, and what sort of systems and processes may need to be put in place to provide better coordination. What we're seeking feedback on is the scope and prioritization of some of this future activity. So if there are some good themes and preferences for additional work that want to be taken into the future, please do let us know. Give us your thoughts on the scope and prioritization of that future activity. We also want to know what your thoughts are on the timeliness and quality of information on network access rights, the kind of curtailment studies that have been provided by the DNOs? Are they adequate? Is the information being provided as per some of the guidelines that we've set out and has been agreed by network operators? Is there any improvement that can be made there? We want to understand any barriers that you've experienced for flexible connections and those participating in ESO or DSO services. Is this a current issue now, or is it just something that we need to manage into the future? Have you experienced any barriers or confusion when trying to access and participate in some of these ESO or DSO services? And then finally, we have suggested some approaches for better managing the curtailment risk. But if any of the respondents have ideas for market-based approaches for managing that curtailment risk, what sort of commercial structures they would like to see in place, what information might be needed to manage that, we'd be really interested in understanding those approaches, and it may be something that we can take forward under future open networks development work. Next slide. So there's a real large volume and body of work that's been undertaken at the moment in terms of providing detail around the interactions between flexible connections and flexible services. Try to pick out a few of the main themes here. So it's really about kind of service alignment, making sure that the same kind of units and building blocks are being used to describe those particular services, ensuring that there's good visibility of those connections and where they might lie, and also what the interaction and physical location is in terms of the flexibility services. So visibility of both the connections and the services will go some way in helping people understand and quantify the risk. A pretty solid base is a lot of work being has previously gone into A&M curtailment information, and hence our request to make sure that that's visible to everyone and is being a service that's being received. And then we also touch on the quantification of A&M costs through the CBA tool. So I see a question's already been asked on this, but the CBA tool has the ability to quantify or a potential route to quantifying the costs of A&M curtailment, and is that something that we should look to being used in anger when assessing say strategic investment or reinforcement of A&M systems? Should we be looking at the potential cost of A&M and any solutions to rectify that by using the CBA tool? And then finally, the last sort of big theme there is the level playing field for both flexible services and flexible connections, ensuring that there's no preferential treatment of one for the other. So that's the mixture of the current actions that are being undertaken. There's some timescales and existing outputs signposted within the report already. But there's also 8 further proposed actions being considered, and that's really what we're seeking your feedback on, the scope and prioritisation of some of these. So understanding how A&M might be impacted upon by outcomes of the significant code review, big one there. Understanding any future service overlaps and what we might need to do to manage that kind of level of interaction. Looking at DNO access to, say, Pursuos, which might provide a bigger market and ability to remunerate some of the flexibility costs that are either being market-led or be potentially being provided by A&M connections. Looking at future improvements to A&M curtailment information, is that something that people have ideas on and would like to feed back into? And then finally, looking at ensuring that there's transparency on those curtailment rules for when A&M is enacted. So is everyone able to clearly see when curtailment might be required and what's triggering it, and able to do their own analysis on the potential risk. The next slide looks at the type of feedback that we're seeking from the D&O flexibility services revenue stacking. So this great paper explains how DSO services are able to be sort of essentially stacked, but how multiple revenues from other markets can be operated either in adjacent time periods or in the same time period, and that kind of revenue stacking is explained and identified within that particular paper. So what we're really seeking feedback on is those identified barriers to participation and the scope and prioritisation of any future activity being considered. And on the next slide, I've pulled up a few themes that are identified in the paper. So the 6 actions being undertaken. The major ones there, in my view, are the common baseline for DSR, which can feed into the flexibility services so that they're adequately remunerated. Whole system flexibility information sharing, ensuring that there is full visibility about all the potential services being operated so that they can be coordinated. Flexibility tendering timescale as alignment, as we've just reviewed, that's an important one for making sure that revenue stacking is possible. And then finally, this ESO and DSO service coordination framework. So that has been completed, and there's a number of different methods that have been designed so the ESO and DSO can coordinate together to best ensure multiple revenue streams available to flexible services. We really want to take those forward and use those in anger to achieve better outcomes across the system. And then in terms of the proposed actions being considered, looking at whether the question of whether visibility should be available for all flexibility services. At the moment, there's a bit of a difference between the contractual availability of open information on ESO versus DSO services. We want to make sure that we've got a standardized and consistent view across the whole system on whether services, whether all data on services should be available, or whether there's some commercial sensitivities around those. So we'd really welcome your views on that. Looking at improving the post-event flexibility reporting and aligning that both across ESO and DSO. Ensuring that we've got good principles for addressing system needs, and that rule set is well defined and understood, so can be applied, fairly consistently and autonomously across the whole system. The potential for alignment of DSO non-delivery penalties, ensuring that there's a bit more certainty of delivery, may allow a truer value to be assigned to flexibility services. Resolving capacity market conflicts is a good one as well, ensuring that the rules for the capacity market are acknowledge DSO services, and that there's no penalty for operation across capacity market and DSO services. And then finally, addressing the potential supplier imbalance. So if a DSO service that's called upon passes a potential imbalance problem across to a supplier, are there routes and mechanisms that will redress that balance, and where should the costs lie from that? So a number of important actions there that we think are the kind of suitable next steps. We've identified them as barriers. We think that they would be useful, and so we would look to try and gain some feedback on which ones should we prioritise, and the scopes that we considered. Does everyone agree that those are the right things that we should be looking at, or if there's any sort of differences, please do let us know. We'd be very interested in that feedback. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ben. I want to hand over to Lois from ENW to talk about product 3.
Hi there. Thanks everyone. So my name is Lois Clark from Electricity Northwest, and I look after product 3, which is active power services and parameters. So in terms of the service definitions, back in 2018, as part of Open Networks, we defined 4 services, but they were classified as reinforcement, deferral, or post-fault, or network restoration. And consequently, they became interpreted in different ways and with different operations by each of the DNOs over the last few years. So last year, we had a commitment to converge on the names of the branding for them, which is these 4 here. So we have sustain, secure, dynamic, and restore as the 4 main products. And the aim of product 3 this year is to identify further ways in which we can converge on those services in terms of the parameters that we use to describe them and how they're operated. So these definitions are still consistent with how we defined the original products back in 2018, but now with the branding that's become a lot more familiar to everyone. So if we nip on to the next slide, please. So the first aspect of our work within product 3 was to identify all of the parameter definitions, and then those ones which we identified as the most important and that we could converge on. So the common parameters between these 4 services are flexible capacity, so the minimum amount of capacity that that a flexible provider needs in order to participate in a flexibility tender. So the utilisation as well, so how long a DNO will require the provision of the service, and then looking to availability and utilisation instructions, so the time periods that or notification periods before which you will become committed or you'll get notice of having to deliver a service. So that's what so we are consulting on that one as one of our questions in terms of, do you think there are any additional parameters that we should be taking into consideration? So at the moment they look like this. So this is our proposed convergence at the moment. So previously we undertook some gap analysis work. So every DNO was operating each different product or service in a different manner. So this is the proposed new common operation of them all. So the key points to look at are that we have reduced the minimum flexible capacity to 50 kilowatts, but we've also done that where we used to have separate minimum capacities for aggregated or non-aggregated resources. So traditionally aggregated resources were higher, so they might be set at 100 or 200 kilowatts instead. That's a kind of key point to note there. So we have reduced them, and we've set the minimum utilisation and utilisation duration capabilities to 30 minutes, so it's similar. So the main principal reason for doing this was to help remove barriers for potential flexible providers to engage within flexibility markets, as it provides some consistency that if you are participating or you have the ability to offer a sustained product, you know that you can offer that sustained product in London, Manchester or Glasgow, and it's going to be operated in the same manner, no matter which DNO you're engaging with. So in terms of our implementation plan, so these are the main aspects that we are consulting on within the paper. We just wanted to get some feedback on, do you agree that this convergence of parameters does help to remove barriers to participation through simplifying the information that is there and available to you, and just making it easier to engage with? And additionally, do you think that we have covered all of the main points? There are a lot of additional parameters, but some of those will be covered off within other products that Open Networks is looking at over the next few years. So in terms of metering or baselining or dispatch and settlement processes. But this product was looking at the core functionalities of those active power services and how we operate those. So we're just looking to make things a bit easier, really. So those are our main points that we're looking for. It's a bit shorter than the other ones, as we did the majority of the work was in 2019 in actually converging on all of those branding names already. So this is a bit easier this year. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Les. We'll now head over to Helen. Helen, if I could ask that you speed up as well, just like Lois did, so we can get on to answering some questions in the Q&A. Great. So over to Helen from WPD.
Baseload determine the point of measurement from which we verify and reconcile a flex provider's response. Do you want to flick to the next one, Dan? So this is a new product for 2020. And we'd recognise that DNOs were operating different methodologies to establish their baselines, and any possible sort of convergence or alignment in this area is really going to benefit both providers and DNOs. So we're looking through this product to collate current industry baselining practices, so both in the UK and looking overseas as well at their baselining practices. So we're going to assess the advantages of those practices and the applicability of those to the UK DSO flexibility, and recommend any methodologies that could be practical for us to adopt, and any further actions that we could take to achieve consistency in this area. So as I said, that this comprehensive assessment through open networks avoids the duplication of DNOs doing this individually, and it also aligns to some of the stakeholder concerns that we've had, and gives stakeholders an opportunity to provide their input to baselining methodologies at this early stage. Hopefully, increasing provider confidence in distribution flexibility and increasing participation in distribution flexibility. Do you want to flick to the next one? So we're taking a three-stage approach. So this product kicked off in June, and we're in stage one pretty much at the moment, the mobilise and define stage. So as a product team, we've been collating our existing practices around baselining, and we've been developing what our common baselining principles are. So what our priorities are that we need to see in a baselining methodology, and identifying which of those are our priority, and weighting and considering where we can weight those priorities as well. And as part of this project, we are also appointing a consultant to carry out some of that research work for us, and assist us with the weighting and appropriateness of those of the practices, so that they can make recommendations on the best way for us to find a common approach. So stage two with the consultant is kind of kicked off this month actually, and we have appointed a consultant to undertake this work for us, and they'll be working with us as a product team to facilitate the alignment of those baselining principles, and they'll be undertaking the research of existing practices. So that's as I said, at UK DSOs, the ESO as well, and practices across Europe and USA and Australia. It's not on there, but it's also important to note that they will be also taking into account responses from this consultation as well. So they'll be looking at consultation responses and seeing where they can feed that into the research that they're doing. And then the final stage will be to sort of consolidate that research, review the findings, and consider where we can implement a common approach for baselining, and look at any gap analysis and how we can implement a potential implementation timeline for DNOs to converge, and produce a final report on the findings with some clear next steps when the project hopefully concludes, or should conclude, around early December time this year. Do you want to flick to the next one, Dan? So, although it's still in development, I've kind of just put a sort of a mind map there, really, of the some of the principles that we're looking at, the sort of characteristics and themes that might feed into our principles for baselining methodology. So, and some of those might have higher priority than others, and some of those we're still considering, and we need feedback from yourselves, and we need feedback input from our consultants to really establish what those principles are. I've also popped there a couple of statements that we established at the early stage of the product around sort of assumptions on baselining, and should we be looking at a common baselining approach that fits all of our established flex products, so sustain, dynamic, secure, restore? Should we be looking at a common baseline across those products? Should we have a suite of methodologies that would be more suitable to different technology types, so turn down services as opposed to generation services? And should we be looking at using historical data to determine the averages for baselines, which is going to support further stackability, as opposed to a sort of a real-time baseline? So these areas on this slide here are really where we're looking for your feedback from this consultation. I think that's my last slide, so I did that as quick as I could, Dan. Hopefully that covers it on.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. So I've seen that we've got quite a few questions that have come in as we've gone. We've got a few minutes left to get to some of them. If we just start at the top, we've got one from Helen Stack that says, to what extent does the CEM take account of the option value of flexibility? Has the work done by Frontier for SSEN and or ENW ROCBA model been considered when creating this product? I think that came in first, so it might be one for Wendy.
Hi, the discussions on the option value have been ongoing throughout this product, and with this, the methodology that's being proposed at the moment is a sort of baseline initial methodology. So the option value is going to be sort of developed in the sandbox area of the tool, you know, for sort of future and to be able to turn on that functionality in the future. In relation to the sort of Frontier and other considerations, probably need to speak to our SSE colleagues to get a fuller answer on that. But that's where we're at with optionality at the moment.
Great. We've also had another one from Matthew Cullen, I think, on product one. How does the Beringer model take demand uncertainty into account? Does it include option value or flex, such as that demand becomes more certain?
As what? Sorry, I didn't catch all that.
How does the Beringer model take demand uncertainty into account? Does it include option value or flex, such that demand becomes more certain?
If it's talking in relation to the sort of scenarios, we have the sort of different, our sort of best view of the sort of requirement, the load growth, and there are going, you know, we can input sort of up to 5 scenarios, which would be the best view plus the defed scenarios that can all be considered. These can be weighted with probabilities and potentially in future, and to sort of, if dealers want to have a look at that, you know, sort of develop that further. So at the moment, those are the sort of elements that are looking at that.
Great. We've got one in for Jodie, which I think would be for product 2. So Satiris, you're around to cover this off. Why does that technical score not include any carbon intensity when we have a net zero target? It might be for Wendy or for Satiris.
Yeah, so I think the carbon, we had discussions also with Optum and Bayes around carbon. You know, carbon is priced in energy markets in different ways. So we are currently haven't incorporated this as a standard, if you like, but there's options there as the thinking develops to incorporate it if suitable. So I think it's still is still under discussion to a certain extent. So it'd be good to provide feedback if there are specific views in terms of how carbon should be incorporated.
Great. We're about to run out of time, but I think we can get to one more. It's from Joe Kamish. Is standardization of historical flex service data along with access across DNOs, for example, prices, technologies, volumes, etc., being thought about?
Yes, in short. So what we'd like to try and do is come up with a standardized and machine readable format for some of the current and historic data on flexibility, so that that can be used not just by DNOs and customers, but as general market information as well to use for sort of future trending. So yes, it's very much in consideration of the scope.
Great. Well, it's already 3 o'clock and we had this in for an hour, so if we can head to the wrap up. But thanks for sending in all your questions. We will get to them in our response document, and we'll email that around to everyone who participated. So we just want to hand back to Satiris really quickly.
Yes, Dan, really the only thing to say is please respond to the consultation. It closes on the 25th of September. And, you know, if you prefer to reach out to us and have a one-to-one conversation, or if you need some of the Open Networks team to support you with a response, then we can do that as well. So I think the key point is that all of these questions, you know, have underlying points behind them. So let's get all these points into the consultation so we can use them in the work moving forward.